Hi, my friends. Well, welcome back to part two of the Jezebel Spirit intercession sessions. I'm going to just quickly go back while I do a little bit of intro. So I'm going to go back and just really quickly tab through these in case you missed the first one or you need a little refresher. But basically, this is going to be a time of intercession. It's not really a time of Bible study. And we're really going to be looking at it in terms of some of the things that Elijah faced as he lived and tried to do what God had him to do and faced opposition, how he got into things where he thought he was the only one, he was all alone. There's definitely people out trying to kill the prophets of God. There was a woman, she was the queen of Israel at that time, and she just came from a different part of the world and didn't really believe in what these guys believed in, and it was a real problem. She was out for blood, and it was really interesting. God takes him through a lot of different things, and he feels afraid. I mean, he feels like he's all alone. He has to confront 450 false prophets, and that's kind of where we left off. So there was a lot of struggle, and there was a lot of confrontation. But this is how it went for him. This is part of life, following God. And, we may be wondering to ourselves, God, why are you taking me through this struggle? Why is my marriage in this seeming catastrophe? What is the point of this? What am I supposed to be learning? Why is this going on? Honestly, you guys, I don't have answers for all of you, but one thing that I definitely believe in is that God is good. He sees our hardships. He knows what's going on, and he didn't have the best or easiest of times when he walked the earth. So, we're jumping into the second part, and I don't know how many parts it's going to be, but I'm going to try to do these once every week. One thing I learned from the celebration of disciplines is just I'm trying to be more disciplined in my life. One of the big things that's come to my mind is if you want to flip over to 1 Kings chapter 17, we'll just be in chapter 17, and we won't be in 18 actually today, but has been to abide. One of the things that's really been on my mind is, God, I got to learn how to abide in you when these tough things come in life, when I don't understand what's going on, when there's all this tragedy and all these difficulties and people are, coming at me. I gotta figure out how to abide. I gotta figure out how, you're the shelter, you're the hiding place, how I can come under your wing, how I can get strength from you, how I can get encouragement from you. So in this one today, basically where we pick up on the story is Elijah. I didn't mention this last time, but basically had gone out into the wilderness. God called him out into the wilderness. And one really amazing thing was that he daily brought him meat and bread miraculously through ravens. Ravens flew in. We're still trying to get up with God as far as the drone delivery. Well, he's got this whole raven thing going on. It's quite cutting edge, and he's helping this prophet out who's out there in the wilderness. And one thing I put on the right side was the prayers is like, one thing, first of all, what similarities can I find in my life to this history or to this story? We're going to be looking at a lot of things. God, I just want to ask you, help me relate and take from this so that I can be better, stronger, more full of faith by the time I get done with this time. I pray the same for my friends. One of the things I wrote down was, God, how can I remember the provisions that you've given me, the jobs that you provided, the people, the encouragers, the prayer partners? God, how can I help me think a little bit about, is it just to make a journal of that, to set some time aside maybe now? Maybe we should do that. Maybe we should go back and just take a few minutes and think about the money God has brought us, the jobs, the friends, the mentors, the encouragers, the people that have, wept with us, cried with us. So let's just do that for a second. And God, there's definitely people that come to my mind over these last 6 years. The jobs, I never went without. I always had a place to stay. Always have friends that were there to support me. And I always had you in the darkest, worst days. I remember finding you. Thank you, God, for that. Well, eventually in the story, going back to Elijah, it says that the brook dried up. He was getting his water out of the brook. He was getting the meat and the bread from the ravens. And I just wrote, things change, and God leads him in a new direction. And he basically is taken to this Gentile town outside of Israel. And there's this woman. She's gathering sticks, and he says to her, he's like, hey. He asks her for two things, but it's really interesting. I think first he asks her for water, and then he very cleverly at the end says, hey, and also, could you bring me some food? Could you bring me a loaf of bread? And so I thought that was really interesting how that interaction went. I think there's some street smarts in that, but I put it on the right side. Are we too proud to ask for help? And especially, are we too proud to ask for from help from people who are poorer than us, maybe? Who are old. It says this woman was a widow. She's out there gathering sticks, and he's asking this total stranger for bread. Maybe we should be that bold, If we need help, maybe we just need to ask straight up, and we never know who's going to be able to help us and who won't. I think that's true. Well, anyway, this lady basically says, she's depressed. That's what we find out. I would say she's out of options. She's out of answers. She's a widow, so, she doesn't have a husband to help provide for her and support her. And many, many of us have been down that road. There may be tough times with divorce, post-divorce, with all the awful stories I see with people going through wage garnishments and stuff like that. My heart goes out especially to you single parents who are facing financial struggles. And I understand that can be very depressing. I see people say, I just want to give up. Like, I'm done. I can't win. I can't beat this system. I can't win. The cards are stacked against me. Life is stacked against me. And, they're angry. But then after the anger, sometimes it just turns into, being defeated. And that's real. I would never out you or something, like put you down and say, oh, you're just being weak. No, like, life can get to us to such a level where we are at an end of ourselves. Divorce is like that. For those of you in those early days of divorce is like that. You are smashed up into 1,000 pieces. You're, depending upon what goes on, but the losses just pile up. And so, my heart for you for sure. But one thing I notice is that, so we got to remember the context. Elijah, he is a man running for his life, basically. God's delivered him. God has provided for him, but he's lonely. He's a man on the run. He's dispossessed. He's basically, running from his murderers or would-be murderers. And now he's in some strange village asking a poor widow who's depressed herself if she will give him some bread to eat. I guess the ravens are over. I guess that thing is over. Jobs end, and now we got new problems. Well, I just had to put, and I don't know, God, please speak to us about the people you'd have us minister to, because it seems very clear that what I wrote was, God will use us. God, that you're going to use us, and you're going to take us into the pain of other people. But one thing I noticed about this story, God, that you spoke to me was that it's in that place that you will minister to others because of what you've experienced. See, Elijah just... God, I just pray you to speak to us about what we've learned from the divorce, what we've learned from all the trials we've gone through, and how you're preparing us to help other people. Depressed people, broke people, poor people, discouraged people. God, you take us through all these struggles, all these trials. One thing I noticed about this story that I never noticed before is, this man had just been living in the wilderness, miraculously being provided food day after day after day after day, and you take him to a depressed woman who's on her last meal. The food stamp card has no recharge left. The bank is in jeopardy of being overdrawn. And this is exactly what you've been teaching him for maybe many months, is the provision of food, the miraculous provision of food. And so he has I don't know. I guess he learned to ask for help when he needed help. And so he had no problem asking her to give him some food, but look at the situation God brings him into. So he says, go home and do as you have said, but first make me a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. I guess in one sense, God, what are we supposed to be learning here? What are we supposed to be learning by this boldness of him, by the way you set all this up? One thing I wrote is that it can often seem like in life, one victory is followed by another trial. Is this normal life? Why was God doing to this? Because as soon as they realize that you're going to provide food miraculously and it's not going to run out, and the next thing we learn is that her son becomes ill. And well, it was really interesting, God. I just wrote, what's the role of these prophetic words? He had these prophetic words that he told her that the bread wasn't going to run out. And I wonder how many of us, I just wonder how many of us have been trained to disbelieve in prophetic words, in the supernatural, in miracles. I know as a business person, I've very much been trained to believe that, you need to plan ahead and manage things in that way. God, if there's any prophetic words that we've been given, or if we just have not believed in that whole thing, I pray you would speak to us now. God, I just ask that you would increase my faith and to believe in things that I've read about that I've never seen. Hey God, I'm trying to understand how to do spiritual warfare, trying to understand how to fight for my family, trying to understand in a large sense why you bring people through these trials, how it's somehow your wisdom that we go through all these hardships and that we're able to bless people along the way. I think that for me and many other people, you've taught us your words, and maybe you're going to give some of us very specific, clear prophetic words that either we're to give or to receive, and we might be afraid of giving those. We might feel like that's weird because that's how that's what we were told when we were younger. Or someone might give that to us and we may say, oh, you're too different than me, Well, this guy is from one part, one nation, and she's basically part of a different people group. And so, I pray you'd prepare us for when that comes. If there's a word that you want to give us from someone who's totally different or imposing on us or, whatever. I guess just help us be ready. Anyway, moving on in this story, he says that, he goes to prayer because when this kid becomes ill, he basically goes to God and he says that this tragedy was brought on by God. And he says right to God that, that God is the one that brought it about. And well, it's really interesting because after that, he seems to have some clarity. A long story short, and he prays, the boy receives his life back. So the way that it was worded in the version that I read was, it seemed very clearly that the boy was dead and that he came back to life. Now this is amazing because we don't often see this. We see Christ doing things like this, but this isn't often that we see this type of thing happen in the scriptures through these different prophets. But we see it here. Well, there's one really interesting thing that I noticed is that the woman, I mean, she basically sees that her son was raised to life. And she proclaims, or she exclaims, that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth. She says that to Elijah. And I remember meeting a guy from India, and he talked about so much how it had been his experience that he can't explain why people tend to believe when they see miraculous things happen, when they see people receive their sight, people are raised from the dead. But he says, that it just is clear based on his experiences that, simply many people come to believe because of miracles. It just seems to be the case. And we see that with this woman. We definitely see that with this woman. And so I thought it was very, very interesting. One other kind of closing remark, and this is the last slide, is that, we know that Jesus talked about this woman. And it was really interesting what she had to say about her, because he said basically to religious leaders from Israel, he said, look, there was a time when there was a great prophet living amongst you. Speaking of Elijah, right? And he basically says, well, who was he sent to? Was he sent to any of the 12 tribes? No, because those people didn't have any faith. Something like this. You should go read it to get a better, clearer picture. But basically, this woman wasn't a Jewish woman. She lived in a Gentile area. And the thing that we learn is that it's really interesting that God chose her to have faith. I don't know what we can make of that. I don't know where God has put you in any strange situations or scenarios that you didn't think you would be living in, working in, people that you would be interacting in, that you would never have done so had your family stayed together and you hadn't had to go through all this crazy stuff. I don't know, but I pray that we would have great faith, that we know that God loves everyone, that we wouldn't be afraid. God, I just pray that you would remove from us our stereotypes about who's going to believe and who's not. God, about who you're choosing and who you're not. God, about what you can do as far as provision, from miracles to raising the dead. And many of us, we're going to be saying, God, please raise our marriages from the dead. I hope that happens, but I think, you guys, I see one thing in this story is that something's going to happen with us where we are going to go through this living in the ravine, living alone, watching God provide for us. The brook is going to dry up. Things are going to change. People might kind of disappear, walk out on us, but we're going to have some changes in circumstances. And God's going to bring us to some other people that maybe are his chosen people. The people that he has chosen, that they believe, and that they're going to see amazing things. Some things that we've seen. I think we've seen some amazing things. And we will continue to do so as long as we keep standing, praying, waiting for God. I think our marriages will be restored, but I think there's going to be something about that miracle that people are really going to take notice. And I think that's one interesting thing. It may feel like he carried on a stick, or it may feel like a million years away, but I think that's the real upside of seeing all this stuff happen, is that we're being prepared. I'm not exactly sure for what, but I think that's what I'm taking away from this story today. Let me know what you think. Hope always to be encouraging. Thanks so much. And God's will, we'll see you next week. Thanks.